All right, good morning, a good Erev Shabbos. Hope everybody had a meaningful and easy fast. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Ayin Beis and as well Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. We'll be stopping at the Mishnah Emir Hashem toward the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom. That's where we'll start from on Shabbos. We're about a third of the way down now on Ayin Beis Amud Aleph. Let's get started with a new Mishnah. Sometimes when a person makes a condition in the get that they give to their spouse, that condition can come back to bite them, and it might even be the case that the get isn't even kosher. Here are a couple of samples, some of which work and some of which don't. If a person says, Zegitech im mesi, if a person says, this will be the get as long as I die, or Zegitech mecholi zeh, this will be my get if I die from this illness, or Zegitech le'achar misa, this get will take effect after I die, lo omar klum, that get is a total zero. Or is it a total zero? See in the Gemara what total zero means. But if a person says a little differently, me hayom imesi, he adds in a retroactive timing of the get. I'm saying that from today is Yud Be'av. So today, Yud Be'av, you'll be divorced from today if the person dies in 6 months, whatever the case may be. So if they add in the me hayom piece, imesi, or me achshav imesi, then hareze gets, because we've anchored that condition to today. It's not a futuristic thing. If a person says, this is my get if the person dies, that's a zero. But if they say, you'll be divorced as of today, if I die down the road, then that divorce counts. Next part of the Mishnah, me hayom ula'achar misa. This is a bit of a confusing language because he says on the one hand, me hayom, which allows the retroactive nature to work till today, but ula'achar misa, and afterwards confusing language. The Gemara responds with a confusing response. The Mishnah says, get ve'eno get. We're unsure about the status of the get in this case, and we have to be machmir for both. Ve'imes, and if a person were to die, and if the husband were to die with this type of condition that he made of me hayom ula'achar misa, and let's say Ruvain was the husband and Ruvain died, so then she would not be able to do Yibum because we're not actually sure if they're divorced. He'd have to do Chalitza because, again, we're unsure about the quality of the divorce. Next part of the Mishnah, Zegitech me hayom, this is your get as of today, im mesi, if I die, he says, and then Ve'omad, he got better, he stood up, he walked out of the hospital, V'halach b'shuk, going about his business, Erev Shabbos shopping, V'chala, V'meis, and then he gets another disease and died. So then says the Gemara, umdino, so we have to make an umdino. We have to assess what's going on. Halfway down a little bit more. Imach mascholi harishon meis, if he died because of the first illness, hareza get, because that was his original condition. But if he got a new disease, he started with disease X and now he has disease Y. V'im lav, if it's a new disease, then eno get, because his condition wasn't fulfilled. He said he was going to die from cancer, and he died from something else, get hit by a car. So those are very different scenarios. Let's open the Gemara here, halfway down. The Gemara says as follows. Alma, imesi, we had seen in the very beginning, look at the first case of our Mishnah. The first case of our Mishnah says, Zegitech imesi. So the Gemara says, imesi, that seems to be kila achar misa dami. That seems to be no different than saying, if you get a get after I die. The language of imesi, if I die, seems to be about a future death. But v'hadar tani, a few lines later in the Mishnah, in the third case that we learned of Zekitech mehayom imesi, that language of v'hadar tani mehayom imesi seems me'achshav imesi, because that get actually worked. So is the language of imesi, if a man says, this is your get if I die, is the language of imesi a future term and therefore eno get? Or is it a present day term and therefore hareza get? Alma, we see him from over here. Imesi, lav kila achar misa. So which one is it? Is imesi implying the future or is it implying today? So this, the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down. Rabbi imesi shtei lashonos mashma. The language of imesi can imply either way. Mashma kime achshav, it does seem to imply right now. If a person says, let's say a person's on their deathbed, they have an illness, and they say, if I die, that sounds like a right now comment. But it also is mashma kil achar misa. And omar lo me hayom, if a person adds in the language of me hayom, that's command to omar luhu me achshav. Amar lo me achshav. If a man adds in the language of me hayom from today, that's pasha that we worked. We see that in our Mishnah. That's for sure a now language. But lo omar me hayom. But if he doesn't add the words me hayom to imesi, so then the language of imesi is command to amar lo le'achar misa dami. So we're getting very, very nuanced in regards to the language of the conditions of the husband. If he says imesi, if a person dies, but he doesn't say me hayom, so then that's get. But if he says the opposite, if he says imesi with the word me hayom, then that is definitely a get. That brings us to the two dots about 3/4 of the way down, and the Gemara quotes our Mishnah. We had said in our Mishnah, Zagitech imesi lo amar klum, that if a man only said imesi, as we just saw in the previous Gemara, as we analyzed the text of his condition, if a husband says Zagitech imesi lo amar klum, and look at what Rav Huna says, Amar Rav Huna v'choletzes. If a man says to his wife, "This is my get," our Mishnah said lo amar klum, which means that it's not a get. If it's not a get, that means that you're married. Right? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna v'choletzes. You have to do chalitza. So says the Gemara, if there's no get and the husband died, that's a formula for yibum. Again, if there's no get and the husband dies and she has no kids, she should now be a yavama to Shimon. So says the Gemara, why did Rav Huna say v'choletzes v'halo amar klum ktani? If the get wasn't a get and then the husband died and there's no kids, she should be doing yibum. Why isn't there yibum in this case? Lo amar klum katani. It says the Gemara, you're right that it says lo amar klum. You're right that the get wasn't a get, but that was more to asira la'alma. That's enough of a suffix to say that she shouldn't marry anybody else. Yavam nami asira, but she is also going to be usher to a yavam, and therefore she should do chalitza. In other words, when our Mishnah says lo amar klum, it isn't categorical. It's not saying that your get is a 0. It's a 5% risk, a 5% concern. The language of zeg gitech imesi, we're not 100% sure if that is a 0 language or a 5% language, and therefore she should be choletzes. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, because in the later part of the Mishnah, the seifa choletzes, in one of the later cases in our Mishnah that speaks about chalitza, as we can see in our Mishnah, 4 lines through that Mishnah, that's michlal dereisha. Then the first case is yivum einam miyavma. It should be that there is yibum. That's exactly what should be the implication. So back to where we started, which is, why is it that the language of zeg gitech imesi and the Gemara says, the Mishnah says lo amar klum, it really should be lo amar klum. It should be that the get is a 0. So why do we have this implication that the seifa is talking about chalitza? The reisha should perfectly allow for yibum. The Gemara says masnis and kirabanan. You're absolutely right. Our Mishnah is like the Rabbanon, but the Rav Huna, who's the one whose comment we're talking about, he's the one who said that we're talking about v'choletzes. So says the Gemara, the Rav Huna, he says that he's Damar ki Rabbi Yossi, not like our Mishnah. What does Rabbi Yossi hold? Rabbi Yossi holds, and this is actually a discussion that we will see in Maseches Baba Basra and many moons from now. Says the Gemara, Amar zmano shel shtar mochiach alav, that even if you don't, this is not found in the Gemara, I'm just giving the background from the Rishonim and from Baba Basra, is that even if a person doesn't say mehayom, all he said is zeg gitech imesi, but there's a date on the shtar. So even though you don't say mehayom, that divorce works. Why? The reason the divorce works is because the date is clear as to what your intentions are. You give the person the shtar, yud be'av. Here's the shtar, take it. And it says zeg gitech imesi. And now she's holding the shtar. It doesn't say mehayom. Doesn't matter. Because Rabbi Yossi says we look at the text on the shtar, because in the date box it says Yud B'Av, they are divorced. So that's how we can understand our Mishnah a little bit more clearly, because we hold of Rabbi Yossi. And says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, if it's true that Rabbi Yossi is right, then forget about chalitza. If Rabbi Yossi is right, that the date on the shtar alone is enough to effect the divorce, then chalitza nami lo tibai. Then why did Rav Huna say that we need chalitza? If you're saying that we don't even need mehayom, and the date on the get is what affects the actual divorce, if that's true, then we don't need chalitza either. The din is that she's divorced, and when you get divorced, there is no yibum. So says the Gemara, if you want to say Masaf Galei Rav Huni Hilchos Rav Yossi, Ein Halacha Rav Yossi, he's not sure if we hold like Rav Yossi or if we hold like the Tanakama, like our Mishnah. So says the Gemara, that can't be. Rav Huna has no svekos at all about this. How do we know? 10 lines from the bottom. Umi Masaf Galei. Does he really have any doubts at all? Rabbi Baravua Chalash. There was a story where Rabbi Baravua was ill. Ol legabe Rav Huna Rav Nachman. Rav Huna Rav Nachman, they went to go visit him. Now, not only Rav Huna Rav Nachman, Rav Huna, he's the guy that we're talking about. Rav Huna says to Rav Nachman, do me a favor. When you go visit him, if he's lucid, please ask him the following question. Boy mi name Rabbi Bar Huna halacha Rabbi Yossi, o ein halacha. Do we paskin like Rabbi Yossi? That case in Baba Basra, the case of Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Alav, yes or no? Amar Le, Rav Nachman says back to Rav Huna, wait 1 second. Taima de Rabbi Yossi, lo yadana. I don't even know the logic behind the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. You want to ask me halachi boimine? I'm walking in like an Am Haaretz. you imagine going into a posik? Do we paskin like the Magen Avram or the Taz? You have no idea what you're talking about. You're just quoting random names. I'm walking up to Rabbi Baravuna and say, "Oh, by the way, do we paskin like Rabbi Yossi? I don't know. I don't even know what's going on. Why am I asking him this?" Omar Lei says, "Please don't worry about it." 5 lines from the bottom. Ad ba minei halacha. You ask him how we paskin. The Talmud Rabbi Yossi, the rationale behind Rabbi Yossi as to why the date is sufficient. Oh no, I mean, Allah, don't worry, I'll ask. So says the Gemara. Boy mine, the question was asked to Rabbi Barafuna. Amar Leib, Rabbi Barafuna said, Hachi Amar Rab. This is how Rab paskins halacha ki Rabbi Yossi. That the halacha is clear, black and white. We hold like Rabbi Yossi in the case of Baba Basra that zmano shel shtar mochiach halav, and therefore, even without the word mehayom, the get should be in effect because in the date box it says yud be'av. So even if he says hareza gittin chimesi, that's sufficient, even without the word hayom. And levasar denafak, after he came out. After Rav Nachman came out of the room, he said to Rav Huna, Amar Le, Hainu time of Rabbi Yossi, what's the deeper rationale of the sheet of Rabbi Yossi? Says the Gemara, because he holds that the date is sufficient, we don't need the word mehayom. And therefore, what we see from here is that Rav Huna definitely wasn't besafek about the shita of Rabbi Yossi, because Rav paskin that way, and Rav Huna was the one in the story who was the one who was. He said, "Go ask." Rav himself said to Rav Huna, to Rav Nachman, "Please ask what the din is." That's what the Gemara paskins, and therefore that can't be the suffix of Rav Huna. So Ella perhaps, or the chitema, another possible language. Last couple of words on Ayin Beis Amud. Perhaps we could say that what was concerning Rav Huna, and the reason why we required chalitza, even though we paskin like Rav Yossi, is because Ella misafkale. You can take your stuff. It's okay. El Mesafkale says the Gemara. Perhaps Rav Huna was concerned about something else. He says on the top of Ayin Beis Amud Beis. Perhaps the concern was Rabbi Yossi Bal Peh Ilo Amar. Perhaps we're concerned whether or not the shita of Rabbi Yossi was true. The shita of Shtar Mochiach Alav, whether or not it's true when the husband said a verbal commitment to get divorced. That Rabbi Yossi Bal Peh Ilo Amar. Says the Gemara, that can't be the suffix of Rav Huna, because imasafkale, would that really be a doubt for him? After all, that's not. We have a Mishnah. The Mishnah writes, a husband says, if I don't come back within 12 months, this is your divorce. He dies 5 months in. So then the din is, no get. The Tani Allah, and on that brisa, we see a dissenting opinion. Another brisa writes, Rabosenu hitiruha linase, that in that case where a husband makes a condition of if I'm not back in 12 months, so then according to the Tanakama, you're not divorced, but the Rabosenu said that it's mutter lihinase. The Amre man Rabosenu, who's the sheet of Rabosenu, says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel, Beidina Desharu Mishcha. This is the bezdin that allowed for oil to be used. What is this talking about? Rashi, 7 lines down, Dibur Hamaschel, Beidina Desharu Mishcha. This is the bezdin of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. This is important Yidios in Shas. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So Rabbi, who's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, his grandson was Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So whenever we see that little slight change, it's a different person. His bezdin, says Rashi, allowed Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya shehitir shamnon shalavot ovdei kochavim, who allowed a use of the oils of non-Jews under certain circumstances. His bezdin was the same bezdin that said this din, that if a person says that harei zegiteh, if I'm not back within 12 months, he said that they can remarry. So says the Gemara, v'savrei laki Rabbi Yossi, it must be that they hold like Rabbi Yossi, to Amar zmano shel shtar mochiach alav, because it doesn't say mehayom. So black on white, we see that this works. We see that Rabbi Yossi can't be concerned. Rav Huna can't be concerned about the din of Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi holds that even if it's al peh, it should still work perfectly, even without mehayom. So 8 lines down on Ayin Beis Amud Beis, the Gemara continues. Ella, what again was the concern of Rav Huna? Why did he say chalitza, even though really they should be divorced? Why were you besafik about the divorce? Says the Gemara, perhaps we're just not sure if we paskin like Rabbi Yossi. We know Rabbi Yossi agrees with it. Maybe the concern was if we paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Oh, so says the Gemara to that. Nope. 10, 12 lines down on Ayin Beis Amud Beis. Is that really something to be concerned about? Rava says, or if a man says this is your get, if the husband dies, or if he says that if I die, it should be the case that she's divorced, get. But when he says if I die, which sounds identical, or after I die, now these languages are extremely similar, and the Gemara calls it out on this. I don't understand. These languages are very similar. if this brisa had the words me hayom in it already, the Rabbanon, like the rabbis hold, because Rabbi Yossi doesn't require it, then this brisa is extra. Had it been that we assumed the word mehayom was there, we wouldn't even need this. Tzricha lemeimar. V'atnan mehayom mimesi areza get. We already have a mari makom for that. Elamai, it must be that this brisa is not like the sheet of the Rabbanon. Ve'elalab de lo amar la mehayom b'Rabbi Yossi v'shma mina halacha k'Rabbi Yossi. So perhaps it's very, very clear according to Rabbi Yossi, according to Rav Huna about Rav Yossi, that Rav Yossi is of the opinion that we hold like Rav Yossi, that this brisa is like Rav Yossi, that we say that shtar mochiach alav, that as long as the date has in it, as long as the get has a date in it, that they're divorced. So therefore, we're back to our original question: why would Rava, who holds like why would Rav Huna, who holds like Rabbi Yossi, say v'choletzes? Because we don't need anything more. We don't even need mehayom. As long as the get has a date, they should be divorced. So therefore, says the Gemara, you're right, but not really. L'Rava pshitale, l'Rav Huna besafkale. I understand. Rava's got clarity on the sugya, and Rav Huna doesn't. So therefore, that's why he says v'choletzes. He's not 1,000% sure how all the cards should fall in this case, like Rabbi Yossi. There's another possibility. Le'olam, perhaps this brisa really is not like Rabbi Yossi at all. Perhaps le'olam de'amar la mehayom v'Rabbanon. Maybe really this brisa is where the word mehayom was used, but we're still in the camp of Rabbanon. Why do we need this Mishnah after all? As we pointed out a few lines ago, if this is like the Rabbanon and we have the word mehayom, we had asked a few lines ago, tzricha lemeimar. So another possible answer is v'hani lishni tzricha le. The reason why this brisa was added was to teach us that the language of she'ani meis is similar to ki'im meisi, dummy, and the language of kshe'amus is similar to kila achar misa dami. It was only for linguistics, but not for halach. Good. 20 minutes left. We're going to make it, guys. I know you guys davened already, but we got to get out of this room by 7:45. So then the Gemara says, about a third of the way down, we have learned Rav Huna, who said v'choletzes on that first case of our Mishnah. Now we're going to see v'ika demasne la'asefa. Some people say that the language of Rav Huna, where he says v'choletzes, is not on the case of the Reisha. We just spent 40, 50 lines talking about Rav Huna analyzing the Reisha. What was the first case of the Reisha? The case of the Reisha was zegitech im mesi. This is your get if I die. And we had said mehayom, not mehayom. And he said that, and Rav Huna said on that case, that's only true. That only allows him to do chalitza, but not yibum. Now, version number 2 of Rav Huna is a little different. Let's see what he says third of the way down. Ayin bezim and beis. Some say that really it's on the seifa. Zek gitech la'achar misa. If a man says to his wife, "This is your get la'achar misa," lo amar klum, that you haven't said anything, and perhaps in that case, Amar Rav Huna uladiv Rabbi Yossi choletzes, that maybe in that case that's where he says that there is only chalitza, not yibum. Says the Gemara Pshita. Midaseifa l'Rabbanon choletzes reisha nami l'Rabbi Yossi choletzes. I should agree to that. If in the latter cases of the Mishnah we see clearly that there's chalitza, perhaps there should be chalitza in this case too, and Rav Huna should be a davar pashut. Says the Gemara, no. Mahu detema. You might have said Rabbi Yossi b'ha kirebi svirale. Perhaps in this case Rabbi Yossi would agree with Rebbe, and there's yibum, and not only chalitza. Why? To Amar, perhaps Gita me'al yahave v'chalitza. Not, sorry, the other way, that there would be no yibum and there would be nothing at all, not even chalitza. That perhaps it's Gita me'al yahave. Perhaps it's a perfect get, and when there's a get, there is no chalitza or yibum. V'chalitza nami lo tibay kamash malan the lo Rebbe savarla Rabbi Yossi, lo Rabbi Yossi savarla Rebbe. That this is oil and water. The shitas of Rabbi Yossi and Rebbe are not the same, and we don't really know yet what that looks like. We're going to see in a few lines what each shita is. Rebbe lo savarla Rabbi Yossi tiktani kazeh get, and we'll get. This is cryptic now, but Rebbe says we don't hold like Rabbi Yossi because Rabbi Yossi says that the get has to be a certain way. Lemuti to Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi lo savarla Rebbe tiktani kazeh get lemuti to Rebbe. They are mutually exclusive. What are the Mari Makomos here that make them mutually exclusive? So the Gemara says, Rebbe Maihi, 2/3 of the way down. What's the shita of Rebbe? Titania. According to Rebbe, the Brisa says, Mehayomu la'achar misa get ve'eno get divrei chachamim. This is not Rebbe. The chachamim hold get ve'eno get. If they say Mehayomu la'achar misa, Rebbe Amar kazeh get. But Rebbe Yossi would never agree with that, because he doesn't need mehayom. Rabbi Yossi maihi. Rabbi Yossi, what is the source that makes his opinion oil against Rebbe, who is water? It's not. Kis v'utnu get leishti imlo basi mikan v'ad yud beis chodesh. No word mehayom there. There the Brisa writes, Kasvuhu, if the people who he assigned to write his get wrote the get Besoch Yud Beis Chodesh, and V'nasnu la'achar Yud Beis Chodesh Eino get, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kazeh get. This is a get. This is a get. Why? Because as long as there's a date in the get, remember the Shtar Mochiach that Rabbi Yossi holds in Baba Basra and quoted here, Rabbi Yossi holds that the date is sufficient even without Mehayom. And if he says Kazeh get. Next case, it says in the two dots here, 12, 15 lines from the bottom. The next case we had said in our Mishnah, if a man says, here's your get if I die from this illness. So then the Gemara says, if Ve'omad, our Mishnah had said that if he heals and gets up, our Mishnah says we make an umdana. If he died from disease number 1, then they're divorced. If he dies from a new disease, then it's not the case, right? So says the Gemara, we have to make this condition. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna is our man of the hour today. He's the one who's commenting on all of this Mishnah. Amar Rav Huna, Gito, a get in this particular case is kimatanoso, is no different than a gift. What does that mean? Well, when a man's on their deathbed, then their words matter a little bit more. Says the Gemara, ma matanoso, just like a gift. If a person was a shchiv meira and says, I hereby bequeath to you my fancy car that I own. But if he heals, that gift falls back to the original owner, meaning if I give you my Ferrari as a shchiv meira, and then I heal, the Ferrari goes back. You don't keep that Ferrari. Well, listen, at the time I was serious, but now I get the car back. Same thing here. Afgito im amad choser. Same thing here. If I give a get as a shchiv meira, then if I heal, the get is now repealed. And the Gemara says, umagito. Even though I wasn't overly explicit about the get, even if I only said write it, and normally with a regular bari that would not be sufficient, but as a shchiv meira it does count. So af matanaso afal gav delo kanumine. The same thing should be true over here. Now let's analyze our case. Let's analyze the din of Rav Huna as well. 8 lines from the bottom. If a person says, like our Mishnah, if a man says, from today you are divorced if the person dies from this disease, and then he heals, then he gets better, and then gets another illness and dies. We had said in our Mishnah, we assess. If he died from the first disease, that was his condition. He said if he dies from disease X and he dies from disease X, even with a brief hiatus of healing, the din is that she's divorced. However, im lav eino get, that if he dies from a different disease, he started with cancer and then he died from pneumonia, whatever. So because it's a new disease, so says the Gemara, eino get. Now let's analyze. The amris im amad choser lamad li umdana. If you're going to say that he gets healed, then why would we need an umdana? Hare amad. He was healed. He got up. He walked out of the hospital. He's fine. He went back to his job. He went back to his family. Everything's fine. So why would there be an umdana? Just look at what happened. If the guy walks out of the hospital, he's fine. Says the Gemara, Amar Mar Bered Rav Yosef, 3 lines from the bottom, Mishmei de Rava, Shenitek Mecholi Lecholi. We're talking about where he took a break from one disease and started another disease. Says the Gemara, exactly. V'amad Katani, exactly. Why would we need an umdana? Again, why do we need to assess what disease he died from? At the end of the day, he healed. He should be fine. They should not be divorced. Says the Gemara, no. Which is the same, very similar answer to the previous one. Says the Gemara, I know, I heard you, but it says that this guy was walking around. He should be totally fine. What's with the umdana? Why do we need to distinguish? If he walks out of the hospital, they're not divorced. If he stays in the hospital and dies, they are divorced. What's with the umdana? Says the Gemara, no. We're talking about a case where he only partially healed from disease 1. Last few words on Ayin Beis base. The halach al mishanto. When he walked out, he was walking on a cane. Okay, so now we see that he was never 100% healed. He was 80% healed. So he's walking out, he's still limping, whatever the disease is in his leg. And now we're saying, okay, if he's walking with a cane, is that considered totally healed or no? Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. What do we learn from here? Top of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. And again, we're going to the Mishnah at the bottom of the page. What do we see from here? When do we need an umdana of did you die from disease 1 or disease 2? That's when, if you left the hospital walking on a cane, in a wheelchair, something that shows a continuity of that initial disease, and then you die from what seemed to be another disease, I know someone who was like they had cancer, they had a stem cell transplant, and they didn't die from cancer. They died from the ripple effects of the medicine that they were taking to heal the cancer. So how do you view that? Is that disease one? That's where you need an umdana. That's what you have to ask. This is exactly that case. So says the Gemara, that's one scenario. And idach, in another case scenario, if he was sick the whole time with disease one, pasha. And on the flip side, if you were diagnosed with cancer and you healed, and then you got hit by a car, that's also pasha that doesn't need an umdana. We're only confused when disease one, what didn't go away 100% and then you died. Then you need an umdana. Good. And says the Gemara, one of the things that we might see from here, is it therefore true that shamas mina, that would it also be true, not only in regards to a get, that a shchiv meira who went from disease to disease, matanaso matana, and then died, would we have the same rules? Says the Gemara, yes, that's in fact the case. Ayin gimel amanala, 4 lines down. To Amar Rebbe Lazar, b'shmei de Rav, shchiv meira shenitak mechole lechole matanaso matana. Very good. Now, let's go back to the Shita of Rav Huna. And against Rav Huna, we have 2 Amoraim. Ayin Gimel Amanala, 5-6 lines down, says the Gemara, Rabba, the Rava, who didn't even live in the same generation, they were 1 generation apart. Rabba was a little older. Rava was 4th century Amoraim. Lo Svira Luhu Had Rav Huna. They didn't hold of Rav Huna. Why not? Because Gzeira Shema Yomru Yesh Get La'achar Misa. What did Rav Huna say? Remember, this is not this recent Gemara, but the Gemara prior, where Rav Huna was of the opinion that v'choletzes, that it seems to be that initial get was actually partially effective. That's why Yibum wouldn't work and only Chalitza is allowed. So it says the Gemara, Rabba and Rav Huna wouldn't hear of it. Why? Gzeira Shema Yomru Yesh Get La'achar Misa. Rabba and Rav Huna were concerned that if we saw v'choletzes in a case where he said Harei Zegitech, then the concern was that someone might, you're only allowing Chalitza? Oh, maybe that means that Yesh Get La'achar Misa. And out of concern that someone would misunderstand about Yesh Get La'achar Misa, Gzer Shem Yomru Yesh Get La'achar Misa, we're not going to allow it. Says the Gemara, you have to realize how odd that is. Really, we're saying that Harei Zegitech, really it should be a divorce, but the Chachamim are saying it is not a divorce. So ask the Gemara, Umi ikamidi dimi de oraisa lo havegita umishum gzeira sharinan eshes alma. Could there be a scenario, and this really sounds a little shocking, could it be that Rabba and Rava are right, that according to the Torah, it's really not a get? But Rabba and Rava are concerned, and therefore, because of their gzeira, that lest someone think yesh get la'achar misa, we're going to let her be fully divorced. Sharin and Eshes Ish La'alma, she can then remarry to anybody. How could it be that the Torah doesn't view it as a divorce and the Chachamim say yes? So says the Gemara, absolutely. We've seen the following line numerous times in Shas. You can look on the side here. Ksuvis. We didn't learn this one in Bava Basra. It's in Yevamos. It's later in Yevamos again. It's all over the place in Shas. Kol de Mekadesh, Adaita de Rabbanan Mekadesh. When a man says to a woman, Harad Mikudeshesli b'tabazu kedas Moshe b'Yisrael, he is accepting the terms and conditions of the Chachamim. And that means that when you get married, anything that the Chachamim institute is what governs your marriage. Literally terms and conditions, right? So says the Gemara, what does that mean? In a case like this, because Rava and Rabba were concerned about yesh get la'achar misa, therefore your marriage is undone. It's all gone. I understand this principle of kol mekadesh adaita de rabbanan mekadesh, and I could understand tenech de kodesh bekasba. I could understand if a man gives a woman a ring and says harei mekudesh asli, no problem, just rescind the marriage. But what if they got married through Tashmish Hamita? Harei mekudesh asli bebia zukedas Moshe b'Yisrael. So says the Gemara, kodesh bebia mai ika lemeimar. Amar le, says the Gemara, that the power, the terms and conditions of the Chachamim as to when they get married, shavua rabbanan lebi'ilas be'ilas nus. Unbelievable. The power, the terms and conditions of when a person gets married with the language of Harei mekudesh asli kedas Moshe b'Yisrael, says the Gemara, it's as though that bia was a bias snus. Very powerful idea in halacha. This requires time, and we don't have any. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabban, a third of the way down. Tana Rabban, the Brisa writes, if we say Zagitech mehayom, listen to this unfortunate scenario. Here's your divorce papers, sweetheart. Zagitech mehayom imesi mecholizeh, and then the house falls on top of you and you die. V'nafal habayis alav ohikisho nachash Eino get. This is very bad hashgacha pratis. You probably would start making some inferences. Here's your get, and a cobra bites your leg. It's not good. It's not good. So what's the din? It's Eino get. Why is it Eino get? Because the condition that you put into place didn't happen. You said you were going to die from cancer. You were actually might have been nice to your wife. Yeah, you have something terminal, Rahman al-Islan. You don't want her to go through Yibum. You want her to get you want her to have everything good. And after you die, great. Then you say you're divorced from this illness. But then you die from another illness. Then the condition of your get was not met. Eino get. And then, seemingly in a similar language, if he says, if I don't heal from this, which isn't different than if I die from this, seems like the same language. And then, and the Gemara says these two cases are nearly identical. Why is it that in the first case, where a man says, if I die from this, then he gets bit by a snake, that's not a get. And here, if I don't heal from this, and I get bit by a snake, then it is a get. Cases are extremely similar. Says the Gemara, Shalchum Mitam from Eretz Yisrael, they wrote, we totally agree with your question. Why? Because the language of if I die from this or if I don't die from this, it doesn't matter, because achlu ari ein lanu. If a person has a case of achlu ari, a person says they were eaten by a lion, which wasn't the condition of their get, then ein lanu, that's not considered to be a get. And in fact, this lack of clarity in this Mishnah, in this Brisa, plays out in the following story. Gavra, there was a man halfway down Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. There was a piece of land that was purchased. And in this purchase, he accepted upon himself any ones, anything that might possibly happen. That's not a good terms and conditions. If a person says I'm going to deal with you, and no matter what happens, flukes of nature, doesn't matter, I'm responsible. And then what happened? It happened to be that the river started to flow through his property. The government dug out a new river, and they didn't care where they were digging, right through your cornfield. So it says the Gemara, also the comment to Ravina, they brought a shayla to Ravina. Amarle, Ravina said, Zil Shafila, you need to go make it good by him. After all, you accepted upon yourself every ones. So then, that's not correct. The fact that the government decided to run a river through your backyard is not your fault. It's not your fault. And then Igal Gil Milsa, they kept going in circles in their conversation. And what did they finally decide? They brought it to the big guns. They brought the Shaila to Rava. What happened? Amar lahu onsa delo shchiachu. Rava paskin that even if you accept upon yourself that it's I'm going to take care of every ones, it doesn't matter. This ones is not going to be your responsibility. So then, Esvei Ravina LaRava, what about our brisa? What did our brisa say? Imlo e'emod micholi zeh. It says if you don't heal from this illness, v'nafal alav baiso hikishonachash harei get. So why? That was an ones. Why would it still be a get under the circumstances? Amar le Rava ve'ema mereisha ain't get. But the beginning of that brisa that we learned the third of the way down on this page, it says ain't get. It says the Gemara. Amar le Ravacha midifti the Ravina mishum dekasha reisha seifa lo mosvina tiyuftamina. Just because you don't like how the reisha fits with the seifa, you can't ask a question. Says the Gemara. Yes, that's correct. Says the Gemara. Amar le in came in the kasha reisha seifa. If we can't figure out how to understand the reisha and the seifa. And that was our question before. We had said, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. If the Reisha and the Seifa can't be clarified, what does that mean? It means, Lo Itmar Bei Medrasha. Don't talk about it in the base Medrash. We've tried. We can't figure it out. This line in this Brisa makes no sense. Umishabeshtahi. The Brisa is Mishabeshta. The Brisa is broken. There's something wrong with it. It's not a valid Brisa anymore. And therefore, you cannot ask a kasha. And therefore, Zil Basar Svara, we have to fall back on our regular rules. And the regular rules is that when there's an ones that's out of your control, you're not responsible. And therefore, you shouldn't be responsible here either. Similarly, Rav Papa Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua Zavan Shumshimi. They were making a sale with sesame, and they were doing so Agida de Nahar Malka. They did so on the banks of the Malka River. Agur Malche la'avurinhu. They hired sailors. They hired a captain to take a boat and bring all of the shumshimi, all of the sesame that they had purchased, to bring it to the people that they wanted to sell to. And these people who owned the boat, the captain says, Kabilu alayhu kol unsa de misyalid. They accepted upon themselves any ones. Lasofi staker na Ramalka, and then the river got the dam was closed and they couldn't get through the river. So what should they do? Amru lahu. Then they said, Rav Huna and Rav Papa said, it's not fair. Aguru chamre, you guys need to give us money. Afkinu ne'alon, da kabiltu alaychu kolun slimis yalid. You accept the responsibility upon yourself. You need to pay us back. Says the Gemara, also the Kamei de Rav. They went back to the same Rav. Amar lahu, kake de chivre. Kake chivre, you are the ducks with white hair. Rashi, this unique language. We've seen this language in Shas before. Anyone know where? I don't. Ksubis. Okay, we saw it a Masechta ago. So it says the Gemara, Kake Chibi, Rashi says 8 lines from the bottom, Avazim Levanim, these are white ducks, which is a reference to the fact that they have white hair. And the Gemara says, and Rashi says over there that Avazim Levanim, the Fishai was a Canaan. You older gentlemen, Mishalche Glimi de Inche, you're taking the coats off of people's backs. You're taking money from these sailors. You should not be doing that because onsa de lo shchiachu, and even if they accept it upon themselves, it doesn't matter. Ones is bigger than their own conditions, and therefore that you would not have to pay. So that brisa is mishabeshta. We don't rely upon that. You cannot ask any questions from there. We'll stop right here. Emir Tashem on Shabbos. We'll pick up 90 minutes before Mincha, because the 30 minutes before a number of people wanted to go to Rabbi Robinson's Shiloh of the Week thing. Let me know if that works for you, and in the future we could modify, but I got a couple requests for that. We'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful Shabbos.